All right. So we're here today to have a bit of a chat about hop contracting and a bit of an outlook on the current crop in the Pacific Northwest. So I'm James Monshing and I'm the Regional Sales Manager for Yakima Chief Hops based here in Melbourne. Let's get Jon to introduce himself as well.
Yeah, Jon Burridge, Yakima Chief and Cryer Malt Sales Manager. I'm based down in Tasmania, but service customers across Australia and New Zealand.
And yeah, today, so the start of the presentation is just a short look at our 2020 harvest and some of the acreage changes within our crop. So we'll be running through the acreage reductions, the hop acreage in the Pacific Northwest, Cascade and Centennial, Citroen Mosaic, and obviously other varieties to consider where there may be shortfalls. So through the madness that was COVID during March of 2020, we took a bit of a bold step in the direction of reducing our crop. So what this did was it put a little bit of financial stress on our growers, but we were able to stabilise the market to an extent where we're not oversupplying and prices weren't going to fluctuate ridiculously. So that's got us through to where we are now, which is good. We did reduce the crop by around 10%, which is quite significant considering the industry itself went up by 5%. And again, that's just enabled us to keep pricing a lot more consistent across all our varieties. So yeah, the total acreage there's not too much to touch on here, but 59,000 acres across the Pacific Northwest is quite large. And now sort of the more interesting stuff. So Cascade and Centennial in the past, as we all know, has been in abundance and in quite high supply. So throughout the last couple of years, our growers are seeing some stress financially where we're oversupplied. So they're not really getting any sustainable returns and bang for the buck for what they're growing. So what has been happening over the last couple of years is there's been some significant reductions in the Cascade and Centennial crop. And that's going to basically reduce supply and reduce spot markets, bringing everything back towards contracting, which Jon will touch on a little bit more later. What does that mean for you guys as brewers? Well, it basically means that contracting is key. So without a spot inventory and a spot availability, we're going to see the need for more forecasting and more contracting to ensure that we're growing what you require. Less supply is also going to mean slight price increases. So we'll be seeing some probable increases through the 2021 harvest on Cascade and Centennial in particular. In terms of Citroen Mosaic, where we're pulling out Cascade and Centennial, we are putting a lot of Citroen Mosaic into the ground to try and meet up to where demand sits. Unfortunately, this year, although the harvest was quite good and quality was there, we had pretty small cone size, so yields were down slightly. So couple that with the 10% reduction in the total crop, and we're seeing, no spot availability on Citroen Mosaic this year. And we're not forecasting to have any spot availability for next year. So again, when Jon's talking about contracting, we'll be touching on that. It's going to be imperative that brewers are to contract these harder to get varieties because we really want to see them in your beer and we don't want to see any shortfalls in that sense. Where there's shortfalls, there is also other varieties to consider. So here we've got some of our other HBC varieties. Laurel, Equinox, Sabro, Idaho 7 is a new one for us where our breeding program, Yakima Chief Ranchers, has taken over the management of that variety. We're seeing a good hit of that going out to the market and some very good feedback in terms of tropical fruit and pineapple. So it's certainly an option to replace some of these other hops that may otherwise be in short supply. So there is other varieties to consider when looking to replace some shortfalls. And that's the short, sharp Pacific Northwest crop outlook. I think the harvest upcoming is looking like it's going to be pretty good. Our growers have been putting a lot of acreage in and it's all strung at the moment. So for anyone out there looking to contract, now is certainly the time to get ahead of that one now. I'll just pass to Jon, who's going to have a bit of a chat about hop contracting itself and just how the process works and how it works for you guys as brewers.
Yeah, thanks for that, James. We've alluded to who we are before, but thank you for coming along. Going to explain a bit about hop contracting, how it works, and why it's such an important part, not just for you, the brewers, but also for the growers. Obviously, Yakima Chief is a unique grower-owned company, so all the information that is transpired goes back to the growers to help project the requirements of brewers. So everything is reliant upon the information we get back for sustainability and, as James said, to make sure that the hops get into your beer. For those who don't know, Yakima, it's a regional city in Washington State, and when we refer to Pacific Northwest, we refer to the 3 states, Idaho, Oregon and Washington. I think it's around 46%, 46 to 80, 48% of the international hop requirement is grown in these three states. So quite a chunk of the requirement. Bear with me, mate. How do we get the next one there? Yep. Okay, so this talks a little bit about our mission, our vision, as I touched on before, the grower ownership, which I think we've got 14 grower owners.
Yeah, 14 grower owners currently, and we're sourcing hops from a further 50 plus growers throughout the Pacific Northwest.
Yep. Okay, so the origins of hop contracting. So as you can see there, it's come about through a volatile market, and a number of things lead to that volatility in the market. Obviously, what we're seeing right now with COVID is literally another step in the ladder of why this is such a interesting, intriguing and hard to predict market. You'll notice there also the boom-bust cycle. We've got some diagrams a bit further. We'll talk about that. I guess when growers look at it, they don't want to upset brewers by not growing what you require, but there has to be a chain of communication that leads both ways so that they can sustainably and effectively cater for your needs. Going back in time, and I suppose the history of contracting actually helps explain why we do what we do and why contracting is so important. But a few things to consider some time ago, there were obviously less varieties than what there are now. The innovation practices weren't as high as what they are now, and obviously breeding programs through Yakima Chief Ranches have become quite an extensive program with lots of new and exciting experimental hops coming through. So in the history of experimentals, you'd see a new hop variety, if you're lucky, every 5 years, whereas now you're seeing up to 5 to 10 every year. So it's exciting. Alpha versus aroma, I think most of you might be aware of that, but historically there's been a huge requirement for alpha, purely for bitterness. But as the new wave of craft brewing and the market takes a new track, there's a huge demand on aroma varieties, and this too is replicated in our breeding programs. German versus US, obviously you're aware of the Germans also grow hops, as do a number of European countries, and historically Europe was the home ground of hops, and only in the last, I think it's about 5 years, the US has overtaken. Okay, historically, quality wasn't a focus. As I said, well, they were purely shooting for an alpha to provide that bitterness. So when we look at this time frame here, you can see in the 1980s there was the emergence of hop products, and it was more or less a buy-sell model. So the brewer would come and say, look, I need this, and the growers would be reactive. So it was always not destined to fail, but it was not the most efficient way to do it. Obviously in the 90s, early 2000s, there's been an explosive growth in craft brewing, as I spoke about before. We'll put a diagram up. I apologise, it is the US brewery numbers. If you take a 0 off, it's almost replicating what's happening here in Australia. 2007, 2008, there was a hop crisis. It was a pretty famous hop crisis in the industry. A couple of things happened. It's an agricultural product, and we rely on, obviously, Mother Nature. Unfortunately, she wasn't kind that year, both in the US and the European hop fields. So overall, acreage and yield was down extremely low. There was also a very large fire at one of the warehouses storing the hop bales, so it wiped out a further large amount of hops, which led to a shortage in the market. So that was, I don't know if anyone was around back then, but we saw prices hit $80, $90 a kilo Australian, so more than double what they are now. 2015-16, we've got the surplus, so contracts are continuing to come into the foray, and one diagram that is not on this is the percentage of brewers that that now contract, and as you can imagine, it is a steep up incline to where we are today, and that would be taking place since, I'd say, early 2000s. It's really picked up, especially with the growth of the craft beer industry. Where we are today, we say balance. Yakima Chief has a goal where we want to get to around about 90-95% of our hops contracted. This is so that it creates a sustainable model for farmers. They don't want to, or our growers and our owners, they don't want to grow hops that don't get used. That's not sustainable farming. And ideally, you want to make sure you've got your hops secured. So contracting is the way to go. As I said, this shows the number of the breweries in the US, and that spike at the end there, the numbers are a bit small, but it's literally dating from about 2000 to current, and as you can see, it's quite a steep curve. Obviously, with the more breweries coming onto the scene, that means more requirement, and it puts a lot more strain on the supply of hops. So it became a bit of a mad rush. Luckily enough, we managed to get more binds in the ground and got to a surplus position. But again, it seems to be the chicken and the egg. It's always catching up, and brewers are wanting more. Like one of the more recent ones, which we don't touch on here, is usage rates. So if you go back to hop usage in the late 90s, it was up to probably a quarter of what it is now. And there's breweries continuing to drive the grams per litrage up, which means we require more hops, of course. So at the moment we're sitting at about, this is Brewers Association information, around about 63% of US breweries are not contracted. That's a pretty scary figure. That obviously means they're sourcing their hops from what we call the spot market, which is literally what is available at the time, and subject to availability is the best way to explain it. Why contracting? Well, these are the challenges. Agriculture, as we spoke about, it is a product of nature, and weather can have some drastic effects on the hop crop and the results of that. I don't think we're ever going to see a position where there will be no hops, but a yield can decrease right up to 30-40%. And that can be brought about by severe weather effects. We talked about the fire in 2008. So that also relates to it. Hops obviously have a poor storage. They don't last forever. So as soon as they get turned from the bale into a pellet and they get shipped out, the time starts ticking, and gradually they degrade away. So you want to be using them fresh as best. The high cost of production, which means, unfortunately, mum and dads can't exactly start a hop processing facility. Yes, they can grow it and they can contract and sell the hops to someone like a Yakima Chief, but the cost of processing, pelletisation, packaging, storage is quite prohibitive. So it's not like there's a whole heap of artisanal hop suppliers out there. What contracting aims to do is break what we saw of a boom-bust cycle where everybody runs in, they want their hops, and we have this boom, and then all of a sudden you've got oversupply in the brewery, so then the next year is a bust. And it's a very hard thing to manage, because I appreciate from a brewer's perspective, how do you predict how much beer you're going to make in 2, 3, 5 years' time? And when we're seeing a growth rate like we saw in that US Brewers chart, similar here in Australia, it makes a drastic difference. And that obviously has an impact on the raw materials and ingredients you procure. The other thing it does is it allows growers to plant with confidence, and that is a key aspect of the whole supply chain. If a farmer has a secured contract that they know these hops are going out to a home, then it's locked in, it's guaranteed. Yes, you might suffer some yield deduction because of Mother Nature, but that's been taken care of because there is a factor built into what they grow and what is obviously contracted. So this is a bit of a life cycle of how the hops work and how everything entwines back in. So I guess we'll start from the farm aspect. As we've just been speaking, the growers need the confidence. And when we talk about contracting, it also gives the operation of our breeding program, Yakima Chief Ranchers, the confidence and the understanding of what hops are actually trending in the market. So it helps them dictate how their breeding program can move in a certain direction to match what breweries are looking to brew. As you know, beer styles are constantly evolving, but you talk to a farmer and how quick they can adapt on a farm is a completely different story. They don't have the benefit of walking in the next day and choosing another recipe. Some of these crops can take 3 years to reach maximum capacity, or not capacity, but maximum yield capabilities. So you've got your plant, grow, harvest section, receiving produce, packaging and storing, fulfill to ship. That's obviously getting it out to the breweries, and within a time frame that it's a bit of a tricky one here in Australia because we are a little bit behind. Some key dates. Harvest in the US is September. By the time those hops get processed, packaged and shipped, they're not generally arriving in Australia till around about January. So if we were to use last year's crop as an example, the crop year is 2020, but obviously the usage will not be till calendar year of 2021. So when you're thinking about the requirements of your hops, it's almost like previous crop year for the current usage year. And that's pretty important when it comes to future contracts as well, because we build in some scalability there, which I'll talk about later. The forecast, the feedback, the contracts, and the quotes as well. This is a huge data source effectively from the brewers to the growers, and it's pivotal in what they put in the ground. It's easier to transition from one variety to another variety, but what we've got to remember is farmers, they're growing hops, but some of them are growing other products as well. So to increase the hop acreage, they might need to sacrifice something else. So if you're going to sacrifice, let's say, your potatoes, you want to make darn sure that you've got enough volume in your hop contracts to sell that new expansion. Why should I care? As I said, all this information filters back. So the variety selections, the trends of beers they're going in, and the volume spikes. Like, how would we know that the usage is going up? We talk to our brewers, we understand their requirements, we understand why they need such high oil contents, because their beers are varieties and styles that are renowned for that high tropical fruity pine aroma. And that information is important because, again, that feeds to the Yakima Ranchers breeding program, and it helps establish what varieties we look to clone and progress with. Obviously, sustainability. We don't want to see hops go to wastage. We don't want to see brewers with surpluses either. So one of the key aspects of contracting is communicating, and don't ever be frightened to put your hand up and admit a mistake. We've all done it. I do it a hell of a lot of times. So it's one of those things where the earlier you communicate, the quicker we can respond, the quicker the farmer can adapt. And that's, again, it's just crucial how much this information transfers back to the farmers. agronomic improvements, better equipment, and also some of the profits. Being a grower-owned organisation, the profits actually go back into the farms. So more acreage, better equipment, creating a better quality product, as well as better efficiency. So that's effectively how the sustainability works on the Yakima Chief hop grower owner side. Okay, how do I do it? Tips for successful contracting. Now, this has got a 3-year rolling contract option. You can contract in 1, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. However, the 3-year rolling one is probably our most suggested because it gives adequate time for the farmers to adapt, and it gives the brewer the perfect, well, again, trying to predict the future is always going to be hard, but it's the minimalist time frame that we can possibly allow that allows our farmers to adapt. So this is crop year 2020, which you would be using now, and we would be suggesting you would get 100% of that crop year on your contract and secured. The following year, so crop year 2021, which will be harvested in September this year, that you will start using in January next year, we would suggest 75% of that. And then following the year, 50%. And the reason for that is it starts giving the farmers the indicators of where things are moving. It also gives you a chance to review things and adapt. Let's say a beer style isn't performing like you thought it was going to, and you see this a hell of a lot, like something will take off, hit the ground running and move thousands of litres, and then all of a sudden it stops. Things like that need to be communicated back to the hop supply chain because we can quickly adapt to that. Plus, what happens if another beer picks up production and takes that volume to another direction with another variety? When you've contracted 75 and 50%, it's very easy to adapt and move things around. But if you're at 100%, then it's a little less flexible. Not impossible though. As you can see, here's the 3-year rolling model, and it's not 3 concurrent contracts. What we actually encourage is people to come back and renegotiate. So, you know, right now, and we'll talk about it soon, but January is the key time, and we encourage our brewers to come to us in January, assess how things are going, and make that pivotal change. So in January this year, you'll be looking at your crop year 2021, and you'll be going, okay, this is where we need to flex and move it to, and subsequently follow on in future years. Tips for successful contracting. It says communication, we've spoken about that. Forecasting is also another one. So it's changed quite a bit in the last 10 years. It used to be, yep, that'll do. Whereas now, I think a lot of brewers are much smarter in their forecasting, their scheduling, and they can actually put their schedule down and calculate how many times in a year they're going to brew a certain beer. Things change, of course. And then from that, the bill of materials for each of those brews, that then generates your annual requirement for a hop. Whereas previously it was like, kind of think we need about 500 kilos. I'll get a tonne just to make sure. And there's your boom right there. So the following year would end up being a bust. We want to try and level that out. You guys don't want to have hops sitting in your cool room, taking up space, and obviously affecting your P&L as well. Check the pulse of your contracts. This is a critical one. Like pumps, valves, all sorts of things. You supply contracts for equipment and other ingredients. Check on it regularly through the year. I'd probably suggest quarterly. You don't have to make a change every quarter, although some brewers like to, because things are moving very quickly at the moment. But just check on it every quarter and just monitor it. Like if after half a year things are starting to drop on a beer, you can start making some plans then so that you don't have a surplus of hops at the end of that year. And that's our job effectively, to help you guys out of positions like that. And on the flip side, the positive is when a beer is going really well and you're halfway through the year and you're 80% through your hops, you've got to tell us, because there's nothing worse to getting in September, October, November, and you say, oh, yeah, I've taken all my allocation, you don't have any more, because right now with the growth of breweries and the increased volume of craft beer, there's a strong chance that some of these signature varieties might not be available. So that one's a very important one. As we said, check in January. This comes down to giving the growers time to adapt. Generally around January and February, the growers are looking to assess what's in the ground and then move the crop subsequently to adapt to whatever the requirements might be. If we leave it later than January or February, the farmers can't rip these up and go again. It's set and not forget, but you don't have the luxury of moving things. So if you do miss the January window, it's not the end of the world. Still talk to us in February. There are other options. But January is the best way to do it because it actually lines up with the farmer's program. Too many hops, check and explore options. Yep, so shortages aren't ideal, but as James mentioned in the crop report, there are substitutes. And I guess when it comes down to selecting hop usage in your brewery, you know, it's a brewer's discretion what you're going to use, but always think of a backup plan if so be it something goes wrong. We get phone calls, not that often, but they're pretty heartbreaking ones. It's like, I haven't got enough. It's like November. It's like I can't magically make another 500 kilos of something appear. I'll do my best, and we move things around to help where possible. But you know, unless you're ahead of the ballpark and you're organised, you're away. But if you're not, we need to react, and have a backup plan is crucial with substitutes, different dosage rates, all sorts of things. Prior crop year is another one that you can get in and help you out. So, takeaway facts: contracts underpin the market. One of the experiences from my time in the industry is watching the amount of contracts in this Australian beer space, because 5 years ago there were little to no contracts, and now it's, I don't know how many contracts we'd have, but it's a hell of a lot. And in such a dynamic, fast-growing market, it's great. Our farmers have the confidence. The brewers have the confidence because they've got the hops. I'd say we've still got a little bit to go, but the communication and doing events like this help. Less than 100 growers in the US. Without contracts, they won't exist. Like, I don't know how many of you know farmers, but you talk to a farmer and they're all growing something under contract. I come from down Tasmania, and potatoes, carrots, grass seed, everything, it's all done under contract. It's a living organism, so just make sure you monitor it and communicate. Let us know the changes. Let us know whether you're going to need more, less, and try and do it in a early manner. That would be appreciated. But at the moment, things do move very quickly in this market, and we're here to help. So feel free to get in touch. Lucky last, we're going to move on to any questions.
Feel free to pop up if you don't want to ask out loud as well. We'll be here for a few minutes having a beer, so
yeah, there's no stupid
open
questions.
to any questions.
That's a good question. Where do you start contracting? Where do you draw the line? And we contract from 1 kilo up. I think it's important because if you're going to do a special seasonal beer or one-off, you need to know it's there. So we'll contract that volume and give you the security. I guess your risk threshold of the brewer is going to be whether you want to or not. Like, the other option is obviously to buy on the spot market. I guess it comes down to trialling experimentals, as in experimental beers. If you do a one-off beer and it goes quite well, and then you're looking to make that part of your core range, I'd be on the phone straight away to contract, get that secured. We see a lot of people play in the space of experimental beers, and they play in that spot market, and they just get enough, trial something, But I suppose on a larger scale, some brewers know they need to make a shift in their hop bill on a beer, and they might say, right, well, we're gonna take out Galaxy and we're gonna put in Citra, and we're gonna do. And if you want to do that, and let's say you need 500 kilos of Citra, you'll need to structure that, and you'll need to work out based on crop years when to implement that change. It's not like you can turn around one day and say, all right, Galaxy out, and then call me up and I'll have the Citra there waiting. We might have to pre-plan. Hope that answered your question. Cool. Any other questions? There is. I think, well, roughly 10 to 20%.
Well, it sort of depends year on year. Like at this stage, it's really dependent on variety. So, for instance, Citroen Mosaic, there'll be no spot availability. So it'll be contracted up to what we think we're going to receive. We might contract it up and leave 5% just for any yield changes. But if we can contract product for our growers, we will do it. Yeah, we won't leave anything open. Absolutely, yep.
Just jumping back onto the calendar time frame, we're in May now. We can't get our farmers to grow anymore, so they've put down what we had contracted back in January with a bit of a buffer. Obviously, that buffer has now been eaten away through more contracts. We've reached exhaustion. So, again, that timing is crucial. But, yeah, if you didn't hear that, Citra and Mosaic could potentially be contracted out, so please make sure you get in early. Any other questions? What's currently in surplus? Whew,
Yeah, I think so. The HBC varieties outside of Citroen Mosaic, we obviously try and create a spot market where we have some room to move and contract up to that mark. There's obviously, with that, it's not an exact science, so we can't predict it exactly. So there's going to be availability on things like Equinox, Idaho 7, Laurel, Sabro, and Talus into next year. But like, for example, crop year 20, we're already sold out of a few of those. We'd be looking at availability for crop year 21.
I guess I'll go one better question. What varieties are we currently looking like being short on as far as supply? And that's not through a growers. Cascade and Centennial, which James touched on before, was always in surplus, and we saw the crop reduction. Cascade and Centennial had their reduction because it's always been in surplus. We now look like actually crossing the garden, going the other way, and for the first time in my life in the hop industry, it potentially could be a case where we're exhausted on Cascade and Centennial. So I think, again, market trends dictate where we go to, and we're seeing an emergence in hops like Idaho 7, Kashmir, Azaka, Laurel, Talus, Sabro, and at the moment there is spot availability, but in August it can be a completely different scenario. So yeah, it's a two-edged sword, I suppose. And once you've got, I suppose, the guarantee that you're going to go ahead with a hop, try to lock it in, get yourself the security, because the volatility right now is unknown. It's someone could come along and take all of a variety surplus in less than a week, and what was a rosy situation in July might be a dire situation in September. Any other questions? Sam? Go for it.
So what we did through COVID, where brewers might have been over-contracted throughout, obviously, the US and Europe, we just opened up some spot availability last year, and then that sort of filtered out and is now, again, sold out. So I suppose the demand for those harder to get varieties, or more in-demand varieties, is high enough that we were still able to move most of that product along.
God love the brewing industry. We fought back pretty hard and quick. Like, everybody's seems to be back on and working really hard. So it didn't really have, to me, a massive impact like we sort of all were worried it would. Like the numbers went down, yeah, pretty scarily, but they've come back equally as scary. So, yeah, good to see brewers have fought back and getting back to where we were before, because it was a really good time in this, and it is now, to be honest. We've got a lot to be proud of and a lot of success that's happened recently. So, yeah, but it still is volatile. Like, everyone saw the recent announcement of the excise relief, so that's a huge win. If anyone's talked to any brewery suppliers in the last 2 weeks, they're booked out. And, we've got the brewery startup panel, we've got record numbers to that, and all these people are coming out, like even startups, and contracting is for everybody. If you are only going to require, let's say, 50 to 100 kilos of hops a year, and you want to make sure those hops are available because you've only got like a little 50-litre kit, contract them. Get them locked away, get the security, and make sure you can brew the beers using the hops you want to use.
So you mentioned you've got 47% of the global market. Was that right? Did I get that
Correct.
right?
Hops grown in the Pacific Northwest, yeah.
Okay. And what does it look like the rest of the world? What's the remaining 50% across Germany and here?
Yeah. So I think I have to check some numbers, but I think you're looking at probably 1% in New Zealand, close to 2% here in Australia, and then Europe would be the 50%. I've got my numbers out there, but that would be the remainder. Very small. South Africa's also got some. South America's also got, but very small amounts. They also grow hops outside of that Pacific Northwest in the US. So, cool. Any further?
Your experimental varieties, the new ones coming out. So, talking about some of these ones that will have a name, say in 18 months, in the next 2 years. Are you contracting those?
Not so much. The idea behind our experimental program is that we really want to get as much out there into different hands of different brewers, so we can get the feedback for our breeding program, so we can basically check if it's going to be a success. So we're looking to spread it out thick and fast, and then get that feedback back in. So for us, the spot market is where our experimental varieties lie.
When do you start contracting for those? Is it once they've been named and you've sort of planted a bigger crop? Or?
Yeah, so we might be upping the acreage right before they're named, and we can start looking at contracting them then. But ideally, for the wider market, it's going to be once they're named and they're made proprietary. So Talus is a good example that our latest release. So we had a fair bit in the ground, so we were able to start contracting it before it was named. But now, since it's been named, it's heavily contracted.
As part of that experimental program, when they have got the code names, that is actually the last stage of the experimental process. And that potentially doesn't mean that hop might make it to market activity. Brewers' feedback is extremely crucial for whether that hop makes it or not. So you might see something like a HPC 522 and you use it and it's great, but the feedback might be something different, and that might not make it all the way through to commercial realisation. Any further questions? Cool. I think that's it. So thank you very much for your time. As James said, we'll be hanging around for a beer. He'll buy you one. But if you have any questions, feel free to come up and say good day. Cool. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.